Caught my wife cheating on a fake nursing trip. Now she's jobless, broke, and sleeping in her car. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the warehouse floor as Rick Hale made his final rounds. Sweat darkened the back of his navy uniform shirt, evidence of another 12-hour shift spent troubleshooting conveyor jams and mediating disputes between floor workers. At 38, Rick carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who had fought for every inch of respect he'd earned. "Alvarez, those pallets need to be secured before you clock out," Rick called, his voice firm but fair. Miguel Alvarez, a young worker with a tendency to cut corners, nodded quickly. "On it, Mr. Hale." Rick watched as Alvarez rushed to properly secure the stack. The warehouse workers respected Rick, not because he was friendly or easygoing, but because he was consistent, fair, and reliable, words that had become Rick's armor since childhood. "Johnson's looking for you," said Dave, Rick's assistant supervisor, approaching with a clipboard. "Something about the quarterly numbers." Rick checked his watch. "Tell him I'll see him first thing tomorrow. I need to get home." Dave raised an eyebrow. "Hot date with the wife?" "She's leaving for that nursing conference in Miami tonight," Rick replied, his face revealing nothing. After signing off on the day's reports, Rick climbed into his 7-year-old Ford F-150. The truck, like everything else in his life, was practical, well-maintained, and paid for in full. He didn't need flash. He needed dependability. The drive from the industrial district to their Lincoln Park condo took 40 minutes in evening traffic. Rick used the time to mentally transition from work to home, something the counselor they'd seen briefly last year had suggested might help their marriage. The counselor had offered other suggestions too, but Maggie had stopped going after the third session, claiming it was a waste of time and money. When Rick pulled into their assigned parking space, he noticed Maggie's red BMW already there. She must be rushing to pack, he thought. The conference was supposedly starting tomorrow morning, which meant catching an evening flight. The condo was a modest 2-bedroom unit they had purchased 5 years ago. Rick had wanted something smaller with lower payments, but Maggie had insisted on the trendy neighborhood, citing its proximity to the hospital where she worked. It was one of many compromises he had made over their 8-year marriage. The sound of dresser drawers opening and closing greeted him as he entered. "Maggie," in the bedroom, his wife called back, her voice carrying that sing-song quality it always had when she was excited about something. Rick found her surrounded by piles of clothing, her suitcase open on their bed. At 32, Maggie Hale still turned heads. Her dark hair fell in soft waves past her shoulders, and her slim figure was the result of religious gym attendance, something she often pointed out when suggesting Rick should join her there. "You're late," she said without looking up, folding a blouse with practiced precision. "I was hoping you'd help me pack." "Got held up at work," Rick replied, loosening his tie. "The Johnson account is behind schedule again." Maggie made a non-committal sound, the same response she always gave when he talked about work. 8 years of marriage, and she had never once visited the warehouse or met his team. "How long is this conference again?" Rick asked, watching as she selected another outfit from the closet. 4 days. "We fly back Monday afternoon," Maggie replied, tossing several pairs of lacy underwear into the suitcase, items Rick hadn't seen her wear in months. Rick leaned against the doorframe. "Me and the other nurses from my floor," Maggie said quickly. 8 of us are going." Rick nodded. He'd heard about these other nurses for years, but had met only 2 of them at the hospital Christmas party. The rest always seemed to be convenient abstractions. "I'll make something to eat while you finish packing," he offered. "No need. I grabbed something earlier with Mary," Maggie continued, sorting through clothes and adding a pair of high heels Rick had never seen before. He watched as she carefully selected items, noting how different her packing style was for this trip compared to their weekend in Wisconsin last month. For that trip, she'd thrown a few casual outfits in a duffel bag 10 minutes before they left. Now each item was being meticulously chosen and folded. "Need help with anything?" "I'm fine," Maggie replied, not meeting his eyes. Rick turned to leave but stopped when something caught his eye. Partially hidden under a silk blouse was what appeared to be a costume, white, with a small cap. His curiosity piqued. He stepped closer. "What's that?" he asked, gesturing to the item. Maggie glanced up, her movements becoming slightly more hurried. "Oh, just something for a presentation we're doing. Team-building exercise." As she shifted items in the suitcase, Rick spotted more unusual items, what looked like a nurse costume, not a real uniform, but the kind sold in costume shops, along with what appeared to be a nun outfit, complete with a habit. Most jarring of all was a large box of condoms, partially concealed beneath the costumes. A cold weight settled in Rick's stomach. He'd suspected something was off for months. The late nights at the hospital, the constant texting, the sudden girls' nights that left her coming home at 3 in the morning, smelling of unfamiliar cologne. But seeing the evidence laid out so carelessly felt like a physical blow. Rick's face remained impassive, as his mind rapidly processed what he was seeing. Years in foster care had taught him to hide his reactions, to observe silently, to gather information before acting. "Should I drive you to the airport?" he asked, his voice steady. Maggie looked relieved at his apparent obliviousness. "No need. Mary's picking me up in an hour. Her flight's the same as mine." Rick nodded. "I'll be in the kitchen if you need anything." He walked out, his movements measured and calm. In the kitchen, he methodically prepared a sandwich, slicing tomatoes with precision as his mind worked through what he'd seen and what it meant. Foster care had taught Rick another valuable lesson. Loyalty was rare, betrayal was common, and forgiveness was for fools. He'd been betrayed by his birth parents, by foster families who'd promised forever homes, by social workers who'd assured him they had his best interests at heart. Each time he'd learned, evolved, hardened. When he met Maggie at a hospital fundraiser, he'd been delivering donated items from the warehouse. Her warmth and charm had seemed so genuine. For the first time, he'd allowed himself to believe in someone else, to trust. He took a bite of his sandwich but tasted nothing. His mind was already formulating a plan, not one born of hot rage or impulsive anger, but of cold, calculated patience. If there was one thing Rick Hale knew how to do, it was wait for the perfect moment. An hour later, Maggie emerged from the bedroom, her suitcase rolling behind her. She had changed into a form-fitting dress that Rick had never seen before, her makeup freshly applied. "Mary just texted. She's outside," Maggie said, checking her appearance one last time in the hallway mirror. "Have a good trip," Rick replied, rising from the couch where he'd been pretending to watch a basketball game. Maggie hesitated, then quickly kissed his cheek. "Don't wait up. I'll text when I land." Rick walked her to the door, watching as she hurried to the elevator without looking back. Through the window, he observed as she climbed into Mary's white Lexus, laughing at something her friend said as she tossed her suitcase in the back seat. Once the car disappeared from view, Rick returned to the bedroom. He surveyed the chaos Maggie had left behind, discarded clothes, open drawers, the faint scent of her perfume hanging in the air. He opened her dresser drawer and methodically began searching through it, his movements unhurried and deliberate. In the back of her underwear drawer, beneath a stack of winter sweaters she never wore, he found a small black cloth bag. Inside was a sleek smartphone, not the iPhone she carried openly, but a separate device, a secret phone. Rick sat on the edge of the bed and turned it on. No password protection. Maggie had always been careless with security, often forgetting even basic passwords and relying on Rick to remember them. The phone's contents confirmed what the costumes and condoms had suggested. Dozens of explicit text messages exchanged with someone named Norman. Photos of Maggie in positions and settings that made Rick's jaw clench, references to past meetings, and plans for their Miami trip. The latest message from Norman read, "Can't wait to see you tonight. 4 days in paradise with no husband in sight. Rooms booked under my name at the Tidewater." Rick scrolled through the messages, absorbing every detail, every betrayal, every lie. Norman Fowler, the name appeared in full in several messages. A quick social media search on Rick's own phone revealed Norman to be an investment banker, married, with 2 children and a house in Winnetka. Rick returned to the kitchen, the secret phone in his pocket. From a drawer, he retrieved a small sewing kit that Maggie had used perhaps once in their marriage. He selected a fine needle and the box of condoms he'd taken from her suitcase. At the kitchen table, with the same precision he applied to inventory spreadsheets, Rick carefully pierced each condom with a needle, creating holes so small they were nearly invisible. He then resealed the box and placed it in a padded envelope. It was almost midnight when he finished. He sat at the kitchen table, the apartment silent around him. For the first time since seeing the costumes in Maggie's suitcase, Rick allowed himself to feel something. Not the hot rush of anger or the ache of heartbreak, but a cold, clarifying sense of purpose. Maggie had made her choice. Now it was Rick's turn to make his. Morning arrived with the mechanical beep of Rick's alarm. He'd slept on the couch, unwilling to lie in the bed he'd shared with Maggie. His back protested as he rose, but the discomfort was distant, secondary to the task at hand. He called the warehouse and told them he needed a personal day, his first in over 3 years. Dave didn't question it. Rick had accumulated enough goodwill to avoid scrutiny. After a shower, Rick dressed in jeans and a plain black t-shirt. He made coffee, drinking it black while reviewing the information he'd gathered from Maggie's secret phone. Norman Fowler lived on Sheridan Road in Winnetka, in a house valued at over $2 million, according to the property records Rick had looked up online. Norman's wife was named Tara. She ran a successful interior design business catering to Chicago's elite. Their children attended private school, they hosted charity events. They appeared by all accounts to be the perfect family, just as Rick and Maggie had appeared to be a solid if unremarkable couple. Rick finished his coffee and picked up Maggie's secret phone. It was just past 9 in the morning, early enough that Norman might still be home before leaving for work. The phone rang 3 times before a male voice answered. "Hey, beautiful, missing me already?" The voice was smooth, confident, tinged with the entitled arrogance of someone who'd never been denied anything he wanted. Rick let the silence hang for a moment before speaking. "Congratulations, you're going to be a daddy." There was a pause on the other end. "Who the hell is this?" Norman's voice had lost its smooth veneer. "The husband," Rick replied, his tone matter of fact. "Tell Maggie she's homeless now." He ended the call before Norman could respond. The warning had been delivered, a seed of chaos planted. Now Rick would accelerate the harvest. For the next hour, Rick moved through the condo with methodical efficiency. He gathered Maggie's clothes, shoes, jewelry, and personal items, stuffing them into heavy-duty garbage bags. He was careful to include everything that held sentimental value to her: photo albums, the ceramic figurines her grandmother had given her, the cashmere sweaters she saved for special occasions. By noon, he had filled 8 large bags, everything that defined Maggie's life with him reduced to garbage sacks in the back of his truck. Rick's next stop was the bank. As the primary account holder, it took only minutes to remove Maggie's access to their joint accounts and credit cards. The bank manager, a woman who had handled their mortgage application years ago, looked concerned. "Is everything all right, Mr. Hale?" she asked as she processed the paperwork. "Just doing some financial reorganization," Rick replied with a small, reassuring smile that didn't reach his eyes. "My wife and I are making some changes." After the bank, Rick drove to a locksmith. By 2 in the afternoon, he had new keys to the condo and had arranged for the locks to be changed that afternoon. The final step was the delivery. Rick entered the address from Norman's profile into his GPS and headed north toward Winnetka. The Fowler residence was exactly what Rick had expected: a sprawling colonial with perfectly manicured landscaping and a circular driveway. 2 luxury vehicles were parked outside, a Mercedes SUV and a sleek Audi sports car. Rick parked his truck at the curb, the garbage bags visible in the bed. He approached the front door, noting the tasteful fall wreath and polished brass knocker. He rang the bell and waited, his posture relaxed, his face expressionless. The door opened to reveal a woman in her mid-30s, elegant in a simple black dress that suggested money without flaunting it. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a sleek ponytail, and her makeup was subtle but flawless. Tara Fowler looked like she'd stepped out of a luxury home magazine, which, according to his research, she occasionally did. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice cultured but cautious. "Your husband's been busy with my wife," Rick said without preamble. He held out the secret phone, open to a particularly explicit exchange between Norman and Maggie. Tara took the phone, her expression changing almost imperceptibly as she scrolled through the messages. When she looked up, Rick expected to see shock, anger, perhaps even tears. Instead, her lips curved into what could only be described as a knowing smirk. "Good," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "I've been waiting for a reason to burn him down." Rick's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his assessment of the situation. Tara Fowler was not the devastated wife he'd anticipated. She was something else entirely. "Your wife's things are in my truck," Rick said, gesturing toward the garbage bags. "I thought they might be his problem now." Tara glanced at the truck, then back at Rick. "Bring them to the side entrance, the gardener's shed, less visible from the street." Rick nodded and returned to his truck. He carried the bags around the side of the house, where Tara awaited by an unobtrusive door next to what appeared to be a small gardening shed. "How long have you known?" he asked as he deposited the last bag. "About your wife specifically?" "I didn't," Tara replied, her voice cool and composed. "About Norman's extracurricular activities? Years. But I needed the right moment, the right leverage." She looked at Rick with calculating eyes. "You've just provided it." Rick studied her. In her perfectly composed exterior, he recognized something familiar, a similar capacity for patience, for strategic thinking. "What will you do?" he asked. Tara's smile was cold. "I've had a plan in place for years. Documented evidence, financial contingencies. I was just waiting for the perfect catalyst." She gestured to the bags. "And for someone like you, someone like me? Someone who doesn't just get mad," Tara explained, her assessment cutting right to Rick's core. "Someone who gets even, methodically." They stood in silence for a moment, 2 strangers united by betrayal, each recognizing in the other a kindred spirit. "Norman will be home soon," Tara finally said. "He's probably trying to reach your wife, warning her about your call." She handed Rick back the secret phone. "I assume you've taken other steps already." Rick nodded. "Accounts frozen, locks changed. Next is her job." Tara raised an eyebrow. "Impressive start. But if you really want to destroy them both, we should coordinate." She retrieved a business card from her pocket and wrote a number on the back. My private line, not the one Norman knows about. Rick accepted the card, tucking it into his wallet. Why help me? You don't even know me. I know enough, Tara replied. And while I could handle Norman on my own, combining our efforts means neither of them escapes unscathed. Her eyes narrowed. Unless you're planning to forgive her once she comes crawling back. I don't forgive betrayal, Rick stated, his voice flat. Tara nodded, satisfied. Neither do I. Call me tomorrow. We'll discuss strategy. As Rick turned to leave, Tara called after him. What did you mean on the phone about Norman becoming a daddy? Rick paused. At Tara's questioning look, he explained about the condoms. For the first time, Tara Fowler's composed facade cracked as she let out a genuine laugh. Oh, that's perfect. Absolutely perfect. Her eyes gleamed with appreciation. You and I are going to get along very well, Mr. Hale. Rick, he offered. Tara, she confirmed. I look forward to our partnership. As he drove away from the Fowler estate, Rick felt a strange sense of calm. The controlled fury that had driven him since discovering Maggie's betrayal had transformed into something colder, more focused. With Tara as an unexpected ally, the path forward was becoming clear. His next destination was a bar in Wicker Park, a place Mary Vaughn frequented on Friday afternoons. According to the check-in she constantly posted on social media, Mary, Maggie's self-proclaimed best friend, was the weak link in the chain, the one who knew all the secrets but lacked the discretion to keep them. Rick found her exactly where he expected. Perched on a bar stool, her attention divided between her phone and a colorful cocktail. At 34, Mary worked as a pharmaceutical sales rep, a job that suited her outgoing personality and love of socializing. She spotted Rick as soon as he entered, her surprise evident. Rick! What are you doing here? Mary's voice carried across the bar, drawing glances from nearby patrons. Rick approached, noting the slight flush to her cheeks that suggested she was already a few drinks in. I was in the neighborhood, thought I'd stop for a beer. Mary's eyes widened. In the 8 years of his marriage to Maggie, Rick had never once sought out Mary's company. Well, sit down then. This is unexpected. Rick ordered a beer from the bartender and took the stool next to Mary. Maggie got off to Miami, okay? He asked, his tone casual. Mary hesitated, her fingers tightening around her glass. Yeah, the flight was fine. She took a large sip of her drink. Did she not call you? Reception must be bad at the conference. Rick shrugged. You know how those hotel convention centers are? Mary nodded too quickly. Right, all those medical presentations and stuff. Rick allowed a flash of vulnerability to show on his face, a calculated display. To be honest, Mary, I'm worried about Maggie. She's been distant lately. I thought maybe you might know if something's bothering her. Mary's expression shifted from discomfort to a barely concealed eagerness. Nothing Mary loved more than being the one with information others needed. Well, she began, leaning closer, I probably shouldn't say anything, but as her husband, you deserve to know. She glanced around dramatically before continuing. Maggie's been unhappy for a while. She feels stuck. Rick adopted a confused expression. Stuck? We just renovated the kitchen like she wanted. She got that promotion at the hospital. Mary waved her hand dismissively. It's not about the kitchen, Rick, it's about... She paused for effect. Passion. Adventure. She says your life together is too predictable. I see, Rick said quietly, staring into his beer. And this conference in Miami, is that really where she is? The question hung between them. Mary bit her lip, clearly torn between loyalty to her friend and the intoxicating power of being the bearer of significant news. The alcohol made the decision for her. Look, I'm not supposed to tell you this, Mary said, lowering her voice to a stage whisper. But Maggie's been seeing someone else for months now. Some rich guy with a house in the suburbs. Rick feigned shock, allowing Mary to feel the satisfaction of delivering a devastating revelation. Oh? He asked, his voice deliberately strained. Mary took another large swallow of her drink. His name's Norman. Norman Fowler. He's in finance or something. They met at the hospital fundraiser last fall, the one you couldn't attend because of that warehouse emergency. Rick remembered that night clearly. He'd been forced to stay late to deal with a major inventory discrepancy. Maggie had told him she'd go alone to represent them both. Apparently, she'd done much more than that. She's with him now? In Miami? Rick pressed. Mary nodded, her expression a bizarre mix of sympathy and excitement at being at the center of the drama. The Tidewater Hotel. Very exclusive. Norman's paying for everything. She reached out and patted Rick's hand. I'm sorry, but Maggie always said she deserved better than you. She just wanted that promotion of yours before leaving. Guess she found her upgrade early, huh? The casual cruelty of the statement confirmed everything Rick needed to know about both Mary and Maggie. He remained silent, absorbing every detail as Mary continued. She was planning to leave after she got the head nurse position, Mary elaborated, warming to her role as informant. She figured with that title, she could get a job at any hospital, maybe even at Northwestern, where Norman's sister works. The salary bump wouldn't hurt either. When was she going to tell me? Rick asked, playing his part. Mary shrugged. Probably when she got back from Miami. Or maybe after the promotion comes through next month. She leaned in conspiratorially. Between us, I think she's hoping Norman leaves his wife first. Gives her somewhere to land, you know? Rick nodded slowly, as if processing a painful truth. And what does Norman say about that? About leaving his wife? Oh, he's all talk, Mary said with a knowing look. Men like that never leave their wives. But Maggie thinks she's different, special. She rolled her eyes dramatically. I've tried to tell her, but she won't listen. She thinks Norman's her ticket to the life she deserves. The life she deserves, Rick repeated, his tone neutral. No offense, Rick, Mary continued, oblivious to the dangerous stillness that had settled over him. But Maggie's always been out of your league. She married you because you were safe, dependable. But she needs excitement, luxury. Mary gestured expansively, sloshing her drink. Norman gives her that. The hotels, the gifts, the thrill of sneaking around. Rick finished his beer, his expression unreadable. Thank you for being honest with me, Mary. I needed to hear this. Mary reached out, squeezing his arm with false compassion. What are you going to do? What do you think I should do? Rick asked, turning the question back to her. Mary considered this, clearly enjoying her position as advisor in someone else's marital crisis. If I were you, I'd start moving money, like now, before she cleans you out. She nodded sagely. My cousin's husband didn't, and she took him for everything in the divorce. Rick stood, leaving a $20 bill on the bar. That's good advice. Wait, you're leaving already? Mary seemed disappointed that her audience was departing. I have some things to take care of, Rick replied. Financial things. Mary brightened at the implication that he was taking her advice. Smart move. And Rick, she lowered her voice again, Maggie doesn't know I told you, so maybe keep this between us. Of course, Rick assured her. This conversation never happened. As he walked out of the bar, Rick could almost feel Mary reaching for her phone, undoubtedly texting someone, probably not Maggie directly, but another friend who would eventually pass the information along about how she had just told Rick everything. The gossip chain was now active, exactly as he'd intended. The pieces were falling into place, Maggie trapped in Miami with a man whose life was about to implode. The locks to their home changed, their finances severed, her secret exposed. But Rick wasn't finished yet. Back in his truck, he pulled out his own phone and dialed a number he'd found earlier that day. Illinois State Board of Nursing, a professional voice answered. Yes, hello, Rick said, his voice taking on a concerned tone. I need to report an ethical violation involving a nurse at Chicago Memorial. By the time Rick returned to the condo that evening, the locks had been changed as arranged. The apartment felt different, emptier without Maggie's belongings, yet somehow less suffocating. He poured himself 2 fingers of whiskey and sat at the kitchen table, reviewing the day's accomplishments. The accounts were frozen. Maggie's belongings were delivered to her lover's home. The locks were changed, and an anonymous complaint was filed with the nursing board alleging that Maggie had accessed patient records inappropriately and shared confidential information. A serious violation that would trigger an immediate investigation and likely suspension until resolved. His phone buzzed with a text from a number he didn't recognize. Norman just came home, found the bags. Epic meltdown. Thought you'd want to know. Rick allowed himself a small, cold smile. He typed a reply. Keep me updated. Moving to phase 2 tomorrow. Tara's response came quickly, looking forward to it. Rick finished his whiskey and considered his next steps. The demolition had begun, but the foundation still needed to be completely dismantled before either Maggie or Norman realized the full extent of what was happening. His phone buzzed again, this time a call from Maggie. Rick declined it, sending it straight to voicemail. Seconds later, a text appeared. Rick, what's going on? Mary just called me freaking out. Call me now. Rick turned off his phone. Maggie's panic wasn't part of his timeline yet. When he was ready, when the damage was deep enough, the fear real enough, then he would address her directly. Not before. In the silence of the condo, Rick allowed himself to remember the early days of their marriage. The genuine smile Maggie used to give him when he came home, the plans they made, the future they'd imagined. Had any of it been real, or had he always been nothing more than a stepping stone, a safe harbor until something better came along? The questions had no answers, and Rick found he didn't actually care. The past was irrelevant now. All that mattered was the calculated dismantling of the life Maggie thought she could leave behind so easily. Rick took out his phone and turned it back on. 12 missed calls from Maggie, 7 voicemails, 23 texts ranging from confused to panicked to angry. He typed a single message, the only communication he would offer. You traded loyalty for chaos. Enjoy the consequences. Then he blocked her number and went to bed in the spare room, sleeping soundly for the first time in months. The morning after his confrontation with Mary, Rick woke early. The spare bedroom felt unfamiliar, but he appreciated the absence of Maggie's perfume, the clean sheets that held no memory of their shared life. He checked his phone, still blocked for Maggie's calls, but a new message waited. It was from Tara Fowler, Coffee, the Blackbird Cafe on Oak Street. 9 o'clock. Rick replied with a simple, "I'll be there." He spent the morning reviewing his financial accounts, making sure everything was properly secured against Maggie's access. By 8:30, he was in his truck, heading toward the Gold Coast neighborhood where Tara had suggested they meet. The Blackbird Cafe occupied the first floor of a renovated brownstone. Inside, the space was minimalist and modern. Exposed brick walls, industrial lighting, and sleek furniture that suggested money without flaunting it. Rick spotted Tara immediately, seated at a corner table with her back to the wall, watching the door. She wore a tailored navy pantsuit and minimal jewelry, expensive but understated, the uniform of a woman who didn't need to prove her worth. Right on time, Tara observed as Rick took the seat across from her. "I appreciate punctuality." "Military habit," Rick explained, settling into the chair. "My second foster father was a Marine, some lessons stick." "Foster care," Tara noted, studying him with new understanding. "That explains a few things." Rick didn't ask what she meant, he didn't need to. A server approached, and Tara ordered an espresso without consulting the menu. Rick asked for black coffee. "How's Norman holding up?" Rick asked once the server had left. Tara's lips curved in a cold smile. "Badly. He came home to find your wife's belongings in our garage." I pretended complete confusion, asked if he'd decided to open a women's clothing boutique without telling me. She leaned forward slightly. "When I showed him the messages you provided, he tried to claim they were fake, said someone was setting him up." "Classic defense," Rick observed. "How long did that last?" "About 30 seconds, Tara replied, until I mentioned I'd had a lovely chat with his wife's husband. Then the excuses changed to justifications." She mimicked Norman's voice. "It didn't mean anything, Tara, just a fling. You've been so distant lately." The server returned with their drinks. Both Rick and Tara waited until they were alone again before continuing. "And your reaction?" Rick asked, taking a sip of his coffee. "I played the part," Tara said. "Tears, accusations, the works. Then I told him I needed time to think, packed a bag and checked into the peninsula." She smiled again. "The presidential suite, naturally. Norman's credit card." Rick nodded appreciatively. "Good first step." "The groundwork was laid years ago," Tara explained. "Norman has impulse control issues. Your wife isn't the first, just the most recent. I've documented everything. The affairs, the questionable business practices, the gambling." She stirred her espresso. "I've been waiting for the right time." "Why wait?" Rick asked, genuinely curious. Tara looked at him directly. "Timing is everything in demolition. Strike too soon, and the structure might remain partially intact. Wait for the perfect moment, and the entire thing collapses." She took a delicate sip of her espresso. "Besides, my business was still building its reputation. I needed Norman's connections. Now I don't." Rick understood strategic patience all too well. "And what did Norman do after you left? Based on the security footage, you have cameras in your house?" Rick interrupted. "In every room except the bathrooms," Tara confirmed matter-of-factly. "Norman doesn't know about most of them. A precaution I took years ago." Rick reassessed Tara Fowler once again. She was more thorough, more calculating than he'd initially realized. "As I was saying," Tara continued, "after I left, Norman spent 2 hours trying to reach your wife. When he couldn't get through, he called the hotel in Miami and asked for her room. Apparently, she hadn't arrived yet." Tara glanced at her watch. "Which means she's spending the morning frantically dealing with your moves, instead of enjoying paradise with my husband." Rick felt a cold satisfaction at the thought of Maggie's panic. "She's called me 23 times, left 7 messages. Did you listen to them?" "No," Rick replied. "The words don't matter anymore." Tara nodded in approval. "Your silence is more devastating than anything you could say." She leaned back, studying him. "You've taken impressive first steps, but if we're going to completely destroy them, we need to coordinate our efforts." "I'm listening." Tara reached into her designer bag and withdrew a slim leather portfolio. Norman's vulnerabilities are well documented. She opened the portfolio, revealing neatly organized papers, financial, professional, personal. He's built his life on the appearance of success, but there are cracks in the foundation. "Such as?" Rick prompted. "His firm is currently under informal SEC investigation," Tara said, sliding a document across the table. "Nothing public yet, but Norman's been cutting corners, taking risks." Rick scanned the document. "How did you get this?" "I have my sources," Tara replied cryptically. "More importantly, Norman doesn't know I know." which means he's vulnerable to suggestion, paranoia. And you've been fueling that paranoia, Rick guessed. Little hints, casual mentions of colleagues under investigation, articles about financial fraud left open on my tablet. Tara closed the portfolio. Norman's greatest fear is public humiliation, loss of status. Rick nodded, understanding. Maggie is similar. Her image matters most, the successful nurse, the perfect wife, the life she projects to others. Then that's what we target, Tara said decisively. I see you've already begun with the nursing board complaint. How did you know about that? Rick asked, surprised. I made a few calls this morning, Tara said with a slight shrug. Your wife's supervisor is an old client of mine. She mentioned Maggie's been placed on administrative leave pending an investigation. That was fast, Rick observed, impressed despite himself. Hospitals take privacy violations very seriously, Tara explained. Even the suggestion compromises patient trust. She took another sip of her espresso. But we need to go further. Tell me, what else matters to your wife? Rick considered the question. Stability, security, her career obviously, and how others see her, especially her friends, like Mary, the social circle. Tara nodded. Perfect. Norman's the same. His golf club membership, his position on charity boards, the private school parents association. How do we use that? Rick asked. We make them toxic, Tara said simply. Little rumors, carefully placed questions raised about professional ethics, doubts sown among friends. Rick thought about Mary, how quickly she had betrayed Maggie's confidence. The weak links in their social circles will be the easiest targets. Precisely, Tara reached for her phone. I have a list of Norman's associates who might be receptive to certain concerns about his judgment. They spent the next hour mapping out a strategy, identifying vulnerable points in both Norman and Maggie's lives. Tara's approach was surgical, targeted strikes at reputation, finances, and social standing. Rick's was more direct, cutting off resources, stability, and security. There's one more thing, Tara said as they prepared to leave. The Miami trip. What about it? Norman withdrew $10,000 in cash before leaving, Tara explained. Probably to avoid credit card records. I can guarantee he's spending lavishly to impress your wife. And? Rick prompted. And what happens when two people on the run from their crumbling lives suddenly find themselves without resources in paradise? Tara asked rhetorically. They turn on each other. Rick understood immediately. We need to cut off their funds. I've already frozen Norman's primary credit cards, Tara confirmed, claiming potential fraud to the banks. But he has others I don't control, and likely cash reserves. Maggie has nothing, Rick pointed out. I've blocked all her cards, emptied the joint accounts. Perfect, Tara nodded. When Norman realizes he's financing this entire escape, not just a fun fling but a woman with no resources of her own, it will strain whatever fantasy they've built. As they stood to leave, Tara handed Rick a small black device, a burner phone. Secure. We should keep our communication off our personal devices. Rick accepted it, impressed by her thoroughness. You've done this before. It wasn't a question, but Tara answered anyway. Norman isn't my first husband, she said cryptically. But he will be my last mistake. She gathered her things with efficient movements. I'll contact you tomorrow with updates. What's our next move? Rick asked. I'm meeting with Norman's firm partner this afternoon, Tara explained, just to discuss some concerns about recent investment advice Norman provided. Meanwhile, I suggest you focus on Maggie's social circle. The friend, Mary, seems like our best entry point. Rick nodded. I'll handle Mary. Remember, Tara said, her voice dropping slightly, we're not just hurting them, we're dismantling the very foundations they've built their identities on. By the time we're finished, they won't recognize themselves in the mirror. The cold precision of her statement resonated with Rick's own determination. I don't want Maggie hurt, he clarified. I want her erased from my life. And Norman? Tara asked, curious. That's your department, Rick replied. But if our paths cross again, I won't be as calm as I was yesterday. Fair enough. Tara extended her hand. To mutual destruction, then. Rick shook it, sealing their partnership. To consequences, he replied. As they parted outside the cafe, Rick felt a strange sense of connection to this woman he barely knew. They were bound not by affection or shared history, but by a common purpose, precise, calculated vengeance. For the first time since discovering Maggie's betrayal, Rick felt something close to anticipation. The game had begun. Mary Vaughn's Friday routine was predictable. Work until 3. Happy hour at Velvet Lounge. Home by 8 unless she found company for the evening. Rick had gleaned this information not just from social media, but from years of half-listening to Maggie's reports about her best friend's exploits. Today, he arrived at Velvet Lounge at 4:45, strategically selecting a booth with a clear view of the bar but partially obscured from the entrance. He ordered a club soda with lime. Appearing to be drinking while keeping his head clear was essential. Mary arrived at 4:45, already engaged in animated conversation with another woman Rick vaguely recognized from hospital functions. They took seats at the bar, immediately ordering cocktails and scanning the room for familiar faces. Rick waited. Patience was his strength. At 5:20, Mary's companion left and Rick made his move. He approached the bar casually, positioning himself nearby without immediately acknowledging her. Mary spotted him within seconds. "Rick, twice in 1 week? People will talk." Her tone was teasing, but her eyes held curiosity and a hint of wariness. "Just needed a drink after the day I've had," Rick replied, signaling the bartender. "Another club soda with lime." "I bet," Mary said, leaning closer. "Have you talked to Maggie?" Rick shook his head. "My phone's been off. Needed some space to think." Mary's eyes widened. "Oh, she's going to be so pissed. She's been trying to reach you since yesterday." "She mention why she's calling?" Rick asked, his tone deliberately neutral. Mary hesitated, weighing loyalty against gossip value. "She's freaking out about something. Said she can't access any accounts, can't get into the condo." Mary stirred her drink. "What did you do?" "Protected myself," Rick replied simply, "based on what you told me yesterday." Mary had the grace to look momentarily uncomfortable. "Yeah, about that. I might have had one too many when we talked." "So Maggie isn't having an affair with Norman Fowler?" Rick challenged, his voice low. "I didn't say that," Mary backpedaled quickly. "Just, maybe I shouldn't have told you like that." "How should you have told me that my wife is cheating?" Rick asked, an edge entering his voice. "Is there a protocol for that?" Mary took a large swallow of her drink. "God, this is awkward." "Not for me," Rick said with unexpected calm. "I appreciate knowing the truth." Mary studied him, confusion evident. "You're taking this really well." "What did you expect?" Rick asked. "For me to fall apart, make a scene?" "Kind of, yeah," Mary admitted, then added more quietly. "That's what Maggie always said would happen if you found out, that you'd beg her to stay." Rick took a measured sip of his drink, absorbing this new information. "She discussed this scenario with you?" Mary nodded, warming to the subject now that Rick seemed rational rather than volatile. "She had it all planned out, how she'd break it to you after getting the promotion, how she'd make it seem like it was best for both of you." "Best for both of us," Rick repeated flatly. "Well, mostly best for her," Mary clarified, missing the dangerous stillness in Rick's posture. "She thought you'd make things difficult, try to win her back. And what did she plan to do about that?" Mary leaned in conspiratorially. She was going to use the sympathy card at work, the poor nurse with the unstable, clingy husband who can't let go. HR would have been all over protecting her. Rick nodded slowly, filing away this information. "And Norman? His plans?" Mary waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, Norman's not leaving his wife. Maggie knows that deep down. She just thinks she's different from the others." "Others?" Rick prompted. "Norman's had affairs before," Mary explained, happy to share insider knowledge. "Maggie thinks she's special because he's taken her to Miami, but he did the same thing with some pharmaceutical rep last year. Different hotel, same playbook." Rick feigned surprise. "And Maggie knows this?" "I told her," Mary said with a self-important nod. "She said it was different with her, that they had a connection." The air quotes were visible in her tone. "A connection," Rick repeated, encouraging her to continue. "That's what she calls it," Mary confirmed, signaling the bartender for another drink. "But between us, Maggie just likes what Norman represents. The money, the status." She leaned closer. "And the sex, apparently." "Sorry, but she said you two hadn't been, active in months." Rick maintained his composure despite the twinge of humiliation. "And she told you this?" "She tells me everything," Mary said proudly. "Always has. I know stuff about your marriage that would make your head spin." Rick took another sip of his drink. "Such as?" Mary seemed to suddenly remember she was talking to the husband of her supposed best friend. "I shouldn't say any more. I've already said too much." "You're right," Rick agreed, surprising her. "You have." He reached for his wallet and placed several bills on the bar. "The thing is, Mary, people who betray confidences rarely do it just once." Mary frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means Maggie made a mistake trusting you with her secrets," Rick said, his voice carrying no accusation, just a statement of fact. "Just like Norman's other women made mistakes trusting him. Just like I made a mistake trusting Maggie." Mary's expression shifted from confusion to defensiveness. "Hey, don't shoot the messenger. I did you a favor telling you the truth." "Yes, you did," Rick acknowledged. "And I wonder what favor you're doing Maggie right now, sitting here telling me all about her plans and feelings." Mary's face flushed. "That's not fair. I'm just trying to help." "Who are you helping exactly?" Rick asked, his tone still conversational but his eyes hard. "Maggie? Me? Or are you just enjoying being at the center of the drama?" Mary stared at him, speechless for perhaps the first time in her adult life. Think about it, Rick continued, standing to leave. If you're telling me Maggie's secrets, who are you telling Maggie's secrets to? And who are you telling their secrets to? I'm not like that, Mary protested weakly. We both know you are, Rick countered calmly. And now so does everyone in Maggie's circle. Mary's eyes widened. What are you talking about? I've been making calls, Rick explained, the lie flowing smoothly, sharing some interesting text screenshots between you and various friends, talking about each other. Cross-pollinating, you might say. You're bluffing, Mary whispered, but uncertainty crept into her voice. Check your social media, Rick suggested. See who's suddenly gone quiet. Notice who cancels plans in the coming days. Mary grabbed her phone, frantically scrolling through notifications. Have a good evening, Mary, Rick said, turning to leave. And thanks again for your help yesterday. It's clarified a lot of things. Wait, Mary called after him, panic edging into her voice. What exactly did you tell people? Rick paused, looking back. Nothing they didn't already suspect deep down. That's the thing about gossips, Mary. Everyone knows to be careful around them, but no one ever is. He left her at the bar, staring at her phone with growing horror. He hadn't actually contacted anyone in Maggie's circle. He didn't care enough about their social dynamics to bother. But Mary would now spend days, perhaps weeks, wondering which friendships were compromised, which confidences betrayed. She would see coldness where there might be none, interpret casual comments as accusations. Mary would experience the same paranoia and insecurity she had helped inflict on others, a fitting consequence. Outside, Rick checked his burner phone. A message from Tara waited, meeting with Norman's partner successful, seeds of doubt planted. Your move with the friend, Rick replied, completed. She'll isolate herself within days. Tara's response came quickly. Excellent. Progress on other fronts, too. Call me tonight, 8 o'clock. Rick pocketed the phone and headed toward his truck. The gears of vengeance were turning smoothly, each small action contributing to the larger mechanism of destruction. Rick spent the remainder of the afternoon methodically dismantling Maggie's professional and financial identity. His first step had been freezing the accounts and changing the locks, but those were merely the opening moves in a more comprehensive strategy. At home, he powered up his laptop and began the process of separating their digital lives. Email passwords were changed, subscription services transferred solely to his name, the Netflix queue purged of her shows. Each action was small, but together they formed a pattern of erasure. The joint credit card account had already been closed, but Rick took the additional step of removing Maggie as an authorized user on his personal cards. He then contacted their insurance provider, removing her from their policies. The wedding ring he'd removed yesterday now sat in a small envelope, ready to be mailed to the Tidewater Hotel in Miami, a simple message enclosed. Property of Norman Fowler. As evening approached, Rick received a notification from the bank. Maggie had attempted to use her ATM card at a location in Miami. The transaction had been declined. Minutes later, his burner phone buzzed with a message from Tara. Norman just called our house phone. Furious. Apparently all his cards are being declined, demanding I unfreeze accounts. Rick smiled coldly and replied, perfect timing. I just got notification Maggie tried using her card too. Tara's response, news tightens. Call it 8 as planned. Precisely at 8 o'clock, Rick dialed Tara's number on the burner phone. Progress report, Tara said without preamble when she answered. Financial separation complete, Rick reported. Physical separation underway. Digital separation in progress. Excellent, Tara replied. I've made significant inroads with Norman's professional circle. His partner, Alan, was already harboring concerns about some questionable client advice Norman provided. I amplified those concerns. How? Rick asked, curious about Tara's methods. I mentioned that Norman seemed distracted lately, making unusual cash withdrawals, behaving secretively. Tara's voice held a note of professional pride. Then I asked if the SEC inquiry into the firm's practices had been resolved. Was there actually an inquiry? There is now, Tara said simply. An anonymous tip about potential improprieties tends to generate at least a preliminary review. Rick was impressed by her boldness. Will that come back on you? I'm very careful about covering my tracks, Tara assured him. Besides, I'm just a concerned wife noticing unusual behavior. Nothing actionable there. What about Norman's social circle? Rick asked. Country club membership is under review due to payment irregularities, Tara reported, and I've had lunch with 3 board members of his primary charity, expressing concern about Norman's judgment lately. Mentioned potential financial improprieties, vaguely, of course. Of course, Rick echoed, appreciating the subtlety of her approach. What about your wife's job situation? Tara asked. The complaint to the nursing board triggered an automatic suspension pending investigation, Rick explained. She won't be able to work for at least 30 days, possibly longer. And the investigation itself? Baseless, technically, Rick admitted, but that doesn't matter. The process is the punishment. She'll have to hire a lawyer, attend hearings, provide statements. Very good, Tara approved. The financial strain alone will be significant. Speaking of financial strain, Rick continued, I received a call from our mortgage lender today. Apparently, Maggie tried to access equity from our condo. Bold move, Tara commented. Unsuccessful, I assume. Completely. I've already refinanced in my name only using some documentation we had prepared last year. Rick allowed himself a small smile. Maggie always insisted I handle the financial paperwork. Said it bored her. Their impulsiveness works to our advantage, Tara observed. Norman's the same way. Acts first, considers consequences later. By the time they realize the full extent of what we've done, it will be too late. Have you had any direct contact with Norman since he left? Rick asked. Several angry calls, Tara confirmed, each more desperate than the last. I've played my part, the betrayed wife, fluctuating between rage and heartbreak. I told him I've spoken to a divorce attorney and mentioned that his behavior might interest the partners at his firm. How did he react? Panic, Tara said with satisfaction, followed by pathetic attempts to minimize it. Called it a momentary lapse in judgment. Hardly momentary if they've been seeing each other for months, Rick pointed out. Exactly what I said, Tara agreed. I also mentioned I'd met his mistress's husband and found him quite reasonable, given the circumstances. That must have gone over well, Rick commented dryly. He seemed particularly disturbed that we've been in contact, Tara confirmed. The idea of us comparing notes clearly terrifies him. As it should, Rick said. Have you communicated with Maggie at all? Not directly, Tara replied, though I did send a text to Norman that I knew he'd show her. Something about considering a more amicable settlement if he ended things with his nurse friend immediately, applying pressure on their relationship. Rick nodded approvingly. Good. What's your next move? Tara asked. Rick considered the question. I'm sending her wedding ring to their hotel. I've also drafted an email to her parents, explaining why she won't be at their anniversary party next month. Will her parents take your side? Tara sounded curious. They've always preferred me to Maggie, truthfully, Rick explained. She finds them embarrassing, too working class for her aspirations. They know it too. Family support is valuable, Tara acknowledged. Norman's family would take his side regardless of what he did, but isolating Maggie from hers will hit her hard. What about Norman's children? Rick asked. Will they be involved? They're at boarding school in Connecticut, Tara said. I've spoken with them, said their father and I are having some challenges but nothing for them to worry about. They're used to Norman's absences. Cold, Rick observed without judgment. They're not close to him, Tara explained matter-of-factly. Norman's idea of fatherhood is paying tuition and making brief appearances at graduation ceremonies. They'll adapt. They continued planning for another hour, coordinating their next moves in the systematic dismantling of Norman and Maggie's lives. By the time they ended the call, Rick felt a cold satisfaction with their progress. That night, he slept soundly in the spare room, undisturbed by dreams or regrets. Sunday morning brought a flood of new messages on Rick's regular phone, not just from Maggie but from her parents, several mutual friends, and even her sister in Arizona. He ignored them all, focusing instead on the day's tasks. First, a visit to their primary care physician to remove Maggie from his medical forms and emergency contacts, then to their lawyer, where he updated his will, removing Maggie completely. Small actions that collectively erased her presence from his life. In the afternoon, his burner phone buzzed with a message from Tara. Norman called from Miami. Desperate. Says your wife is becoming difficult. Hotel demanding payment for extended stay. Rick replied, Any idea where Maggie will go when she returns to Chicago? Tara's answer came quickly, Norman talking about putting her in a hotel temporarily. He doesn't realize yet how bad his own situation is. Throughout the day, the plan continued to unfold with methodical precision. Rick received notification that the Illinois State Board of Nursing had officially placed Maggie on administrative leave pending investigation. Her hospital access had been suspended, meaning no paycheck, no professional identity, no stability. By evening, another update arrived from Tara. Norman coming home tomorrow. Apparently, the conference is ending early. Your wife's staying in Miami to enjoy the beach, according to his text. Translation, they're fighting. Rick smiled at the predictable collapse of their fantasy romance. Any changes in Norman's professional situation? His firm called an emergency partners meeting Tuesday morning, Tara replied. My source says they're discussing separation options. The pieces were falling into place faster than Rick had anticipated. Maggie stranded in Miami with nowhere to go. Norman returning to a professional and personal life in ruins, both of them watching their carefully constructed worlds crumble around them. That evening, Rick composed a single text message to Maggie on his regular phone, briefly unblocking her number to send it. "You traded loyalty for chaos. Enjoy the consequences." He blocked her number again immediately after sending it, denying her any opportunity to respond, to explain, to manipulate. Silence would be his only communication now. Monday morning, Rick returned to work at the warehouse. Dave, his assistant supervisor, greeted him with concern. "Everything okay? You never take personal days. Just some household issues," Rick replied vaguely. "All resolved now." He threw himself into work, the familiar routine of inventory management and staff supervision providing a welcome structure. At lunch, he checked the burner phone. A new message from Tara waited. "Norman landed this morning. Looks terrible. Told me they had a misunderstanding with your wife. Apparently, she's flying back tomorrow." Rick replied. "Where will she go?" "He mentioned something about a hotel near the hospital," Tara responded. "Doesn't seem to have a solid plan. Too busy dealing with the sudden administrative leave his firm put him on this morning." Rick nodded to himself. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. Norman and Maggie both experiencing the consequences of their actions, not through dramatic confrontation or emotional outbursts, but through the cold, methodical dismantling of everything they valued. That evening, Rick drove past their condo building, noting the security guard he'd specifically instructed to watch for Maggie. She would find no refuge there when she returned. No home, no job, no financial resources. His burner phone buzzed with another message from Tara. Norman received a call from the country club. His membership has been temporarily suspended pending review. He's furious but helpless. "When it rains, it pours," Rick replied. Tara's response came moments later, perfect symmetry. "Let them comfort each other while they still can. Soon enough, they'll be too busy saving themselves to worry about their connection." Rick smiled at the cold accuracy of Tara's assessment. The romance that had seemed worth risking everything for would soon become a liability for both Norman and Maggie. Their affair, built on excitement and escape, would crumble under the weight of real-world consequences. That night, as Rick prepared for bed, a final message arrived from Tara. Surveillance camera caught Norman packing a bag secretly. "Appears to be planning an escape. Your wife may find herself completely abandoned when she returns tomorrow." Rick felt no sympathy, only cold satisfaction. He replied, "Let me know what happens. The real consequences are just beginning." He slept soundly that night, undisturbed by dreams or regrets. Tuesday morning arrived with the crisp certainty of autumn in Chicago. Rick stood at his kitchen window, coffee in hand, watching the neighborhood come to life. 6 days had passed since discovering Maggie's betrayal. 6 days of methodical, precise dismantling of the life she'd taken for granted. His burner phone buzzed on the counter. Tara's updates had become a regular part of his morning routine. Norman didn't come home last night. Tracking his credit cards shows a motel near O'Hare. Your wife arrives at Midway at 11:15 this morning. Doubt he'll be there to meet her. Rick's reply was simple, perfect. He dressed for work with the same efficiency he applied to everything. Dark jeans, navy button-down, steel-toed boots. The warehouse didn't require formal attire, just practicality and reliability, 2 traits Maggie had eventually found boring. Eventually, she found a job at a small clinic in a neighboring state, according to Dave, who had run into her sister at a grocery store. The nursing board investigation had ended with a warning rather than a license revocation, a mercy Rick hadn't planned on but didn't begrudge. She would rebuild some version of her life eventually, just not the one she'd imagined with Norman, and never again with Rick. The divorce had been finalized last week. Clean, simple, uncontested. Maggie had signed everything without argument, claiming nothing beyond her personal items, which Rick had arranged to have shipped to her new address. The final severance of a connection that had once seemed permanent. From inside the house, Rick's phone rang, the warehouse calling with a question about inventory. He answered efficiently, provided the necessary information, and returned to his coffee. The rhythm of his life had reasserted itself. Work, home, occasional dinners with colleagues. Simple, predictable, stable. All the things Maggie had found so boring. In the distance, Norman's father emerged from his house to collect the morning newspaper. He glanced up, noticed Rick sitting on his porch, and quickly looked away. This had become their routine, acknowledgement without engagement. The older man knew exactly why Rick had purchased the house across from theirs. The daily reminder was part of the punishment. Rick finished his coffee as the neighborhood came to life around him. Somewhere, Maggie was waking up in a strange city, building a new life from the ashes of the one she destroyed. Somewhere, Norman was trying to reclaim some fragment of his former status, haunted by what he'd lost. And here sat Rick, in the quiet satisfaction of justice served. Not through rage or public confrontation, but through the cold, methodical application of consequences. Some betrayals don't deserve rage. Rick murmured to himself as dawn broke fully over the neighborhood, just the silence of being forgotten. The words settled around him like a verdict. Final, absolute, complete. As he drove to work, his thoughts turned to the next phase of their plan. Tara had suggested they meet tonight to coordinate their final moves. The foundation had been weakened. Now was the time to bring the entire structure down. The warehouse was already bustling when Rick arrived. Dave approached immediately, a clipboard in hand. "Morning, boss." Johnson called again about the quarterly shipment. "Says there are discrepancies in the manifests." Rick nodded, shifting into work mode. "I'll handle it. Get Rodriguez to double-check the inventory counts in Section C first." Work provided a welcome distraction, a framework of problems that could be solved through logic and effort. Unlike marriage, unlike trust, unlike loyalty. At 11:20, his burner phone buzzed again. Flight landed. No sign of Norman at the airport. He's still hiding at the motel. Rick smiled coldly. Maggie would emerge from the terminal expecting Norman, her savior, her escape, her fantasy, only to find herself alone. He replied, "Any updates on Norman's professional situation?" Tara's response came quickly. "Meeting with partners happening now. His assistant just called me, asking if I knew where he was. Apparently he's not answering his phone." The dominoes were falling exactly as planned. Norman hiding from his collapsing life. Maggie returning to a city where she no longer had a home, a job, or resources. At lunch, Rick checked his regular phone. 3 new voicemails from Maggie, each more desperate than the last. The first, "Rick, please, I can't get into the condo, my cards aren't working. I know you're angry, but we need to talk. Call me back." The second, "I'm at the airport. Norman was supposed to meet me, but he's not answering. I don't have anywhere to go. Please, Rick." The third, "Left just 20 minutes ago, Rick. I'm sorry, I made a mistake. Please, just call me back. I don't know what to do." Rick deleted the messages without responding. The time for words had passed. His burner phone buzzed again. Tara with another update. Norman's partners meeting ended. "My source confirms he's been suspended indefinitely." Firm issuing statement distancing themselves from individual actions not reflecting company values. Translation, he's finished. Rick replied, "How's Norman taking it?" "Still hiding at the motel," Tara responded. "Called me twice, raging about conspiracies and setups, blaming everyone but himself." By 3 in the afternoon, another update arrived. "Your wife just tried to use her hospital badge. Security turned her away. Apparently she made quite a scene in the lobby." Rick could picture it clearly. Maggie, always so composed, so certain of her place in the world, being escorted from the hospital where she'd built her identity. The systematic dismantling was proceeding exactly as planned. When he left work that evening, Rick took a deliberate detour past the hospital. Sure enough, he spotted Maggie sitting on a bench near the entrance, her suitcase beside her. Even from a distance, he could see her distress, hair pulled back hastily, shoulders slumped, continuously checking her phone. For a brief moment, he considered driving away, letting her sit there indefinitely. But the plan required precision, not cruelty for its own sake. He parked across the street and texted Tara, "Maggie's at the hospital. Looks like she has nowhere to go." Tara's reply was immediate. "Norman's still at the motel. He's been drinking since noon, according to his credit card charges." "Perfect," Rick responded. "Time for the next phase." "Absolutely," Tara replied. "Meet me at Petros at 7 tonight." Petros was an upscale Italian restaurant in the business district, the kind of place Norman would normally frequent with clients or for celebrations. Rick showered and changed at home, selecting a dark suit he rarely wore, a deliberate choice for what would come next. Tara was already seated when he arrived, impeccable in a fitted black dress, her blonde hair swept up elegantly. She looked like power and control personified. "Right on time," she observed as Rick took the seat across from her. The waiter approached immediately. Tara ordered a martini with practiced ease. Rick asked for sparkling water. "You don't drink?" Tara asked once the waiter had left. "Not when precision matters," Rick replied. Tara nodded approvingly. Norman could learn from that. He's apparently working his way through the minibar at the airport inn. And Maggie got a room at a budget hotel near the hospital, used Mary's credit card information. "Apparently your wife had it memorized from past shopping trips." Rick raised an eyebrow. "Identity theft. That's new." "Desperation leads to innovation," Tara said with a cold smile. "Mary will notice the charge eventually, of course. Another friendship that won't survive." The waiter returned with their drinks. They waited until he was out of earshot before continuing. "Norman's partners voted unanimously to distance the firm from him," Tara explained, taking a precise sip of her martini. "The official statement cites personal issues affecting professional judgment. Unofficially, they're investigating his client accounts for irregularities." "Were there irregularities?" Rick asked. There are now, Tara replied with a slight shrug. Anonymous tips have a way of focusing attention on specific areas. Rick nodded, impressed once again by her thoroughness. And the financial situation? This morning I moved the majority of our liquid assets to accounts in my name only, Tara said. The prenuptial agreement Norman insisted on works beautifully against him now. It specified that business losses due to ethical violations would be excluded from shared marital assets.
And you have documentation of these violations?
Years' worth, Tara confirmed. Norman believed I was too busy with my design business to pay attention to his financial movements. He was mistaken. They ordered dinner, neither particularly hungry, but the restaurant providing perfect cover for their meeting. What about Maggie's professional situation? Tara asked, cutting her salmon with surgical precision. The nursing board investigation is proceeding, Rick explained. I've added an anonymous complaint suggesting she accessed confidential patient information to facilitate pharmaceutical sales through Mary. Will that stick? It doesn't need to, Rick pointed out. The process is the punishment. She'll have legal fees, hearings, constant anxiety. By the time she clears her name, if she can, months will have passed, during which she'll have no income, no professional standing. Tara nodded with satisfaction. Exactly. And her social circle? Rick allowed himself a small smile. Mary's paranoia is working perfectly. She's convinced Maggie betrayed their friendship by sharing private conversations. The other hospital friends are choosing sides. Most are distancing themselves from both. Isolation is powerful, Tara observed. Humans need connection. Strip that away, along with financial security and professional identity, and what's left? Precisely nothing, Rick finished her thought. Tara confirmed, now, about the gala, Friday night. The charity gala had been Norman's pet project, an annual event where he played the role of generous benefactor, networked with potential clients, and basked in social approval. This year's event would be very different. Everything is arranged, Tara assured him. Norman's name remains on the program as co-chair, but the board has privately asked him not to attend. They've cited recent concerns without specifics. Will he comply? Of course not, Tara said with certainty. Norman's ego won't allow it. He'll convince himself he can smooth things over in person, win back support with his charm. And Maggie? That's where our paths may cross, Tara explained. Norman will likely try to bring her, partly as a distraction, partly because he still believes their relationship might salvage his reputation somehow. Will she go? What choice does she have? Tara pointed out. She has no home, dwindling resources, a professional reputation in tatters. Norman, despite his own collapse, still represents her best option. Rick considered this. So they'll cling to each other even as they drag each other down. For now, Tara agreed, until the gala makes clear just how far they've both fallen. You want me to attend, Rick surmised. Your presence would add the perfect touch, Tara confirmed. Besides, I might need backup if Norman becomes volatile. Rick nodded. He'd seen the cold calculation in Tara's eyes, the methodical way she'd orchestrated Norman's downfall, but for the first time, he glimpsed something else. Caution, perhaps even a hint of fear. Has he been violent before? Rick asked directly. Tara's expression didn't change, but something in her posture shifted subtly. Norman has always struggled with control when things don't go his way. She didn't need to finish the sentence. Rick understood immediately. I'll be there, he promised. What time? 7:30, Tara replied. Wear what you're wearing now. You look formidable. They finished dinner, discussing the final details of their plan. By the time they parted outside the restaurant, Rick felt the same cold certainty he'd experienced when piercing the condoms in Maggie's suitcase. Not rage, not vengeance, but the simple application of consequences. Tomorrow will be interesting, Tara observed as her driver pulled up. Norman has a meeting with the bank about irregularities in his accounts. I expect he'll try to contact Maggie afterward, seeking comfort or perhaps financial assistance. She has nothing to offer, Rick pointed out. Exactly, Tara smiled coldly. The realization that they're both drowning should be illuminating for them both. As Rick drove home, his burner phone buzzed with one final message from Tara, just received frantic call from Norman. Bank freezing personal accounts pending investigation. He's spinning out completely. Rick's reply was simple, good. Friday evening arrived with a sense of inevitability. Rick adjusted his tie in the mirror, noting how different he looked. Formal, harder somehow, more imposing. The suit, rarely worn, had been purchased for a hospital fundraiser 3 years ago. Maggie had insisted, claiming his regular clothes weren't appropriate for her professional circle. Tonight, he would wear it to witness her complete social collapse. His burner phone buzzed with a message from Tara. Norman's been drinking since noon. tried to access our joint investment account, unable. Called his broker, who has stopped taking his calls. He's planning to attend the gala despite the board's request. Says he'll set everything straight. Rick replied. Any sign of Maggie? Norman picked her up at the budget hotel, Tara responded. My source at the front desk says she looked rough, wearing a dress that's seen better days. The detail gave Rick a grim satisfaction. Maggie, who'd always been so careful about appearances, reduced to recycling old outfits. The systematic dismantling of her identity was nearly complete. Rick arrived at the Palmer House at precisely 7:30. The historic hotel's grand ballroom had been transformed for the charity gala. Crystal chandeliers glowing above elegantly dressed attendees, soft music playing as waiters circulated with champagne and appetizers. Tara stood near the entrance, stunning in a deep blue gown that suggested wealth without flaunting it. Her hair was swept up elegantly, diamond earrings catching the light as she turned to greet him. Right on time, she observed, her standard greeting. Always, Rick replied, accepting the champagne flute she handed him. He had no intention of drinking it but understood the importance of appearances tonight. Norman and Maggie haven't arrived yet, Tara explained, guiding him toward a less crowded corner of the room. My source at the hotel says they had an argument in the bar. Norman apparently blamed her for distracting him from work and causing his current problems. How did she take that? Not well, Tara replied with cold satisfaction. But she has nowhere else to go, so she's still with him for now. They circulated through the room, Tara introducing Rick to various members of Chicago's elite with practiced ease. To anyone watching, they appeared to be merely acquaintances having a pleasant conversation at a charity event. No one would guess they were orchestrating the complete social and financial destruction of two people. At 8:15, a subtle shift in the room's energy alerted Rick to Norman and Maggie's arrival. Conversations paused briefly, glances were exchanged, whispers began. Tara touched his arm lightly, directing his attention toward the entrance. Norman Fowler stood in the doorway, attempting to project his usual confidence despite clear signs of strain. His suit, while expensive, looked rumpled, and his complexion had the gray undertone of someone who hadn't slept properly in days. Beside him, Maggie looked almost unrecognizable from the woman who had packed so carefully for Miami just a week ago. Her black dress was clearly one she'd worn to previous events, slightly dated and missing the perfect fit she usually insisted on. Her makeup, normally flawless, seemed hastily applied, and dark circles showed beneath her eyes despite her attempts to conceal them. But most striking was her expression, a brittle smile that seemed one wrong word away from shattering completely. They looked terrible, Rick observed dispassionately. The outward manifestation of internal collapse, Tara agreed. Watch what happens next. Norman, with Maggie clutching his arm, moved into the room with forced confidence. He approached a group that included two of his firm's senior partners, extending a hand with a booming, "Alan, good to see you." The older man turned slowly, his expression cooling visibly. "Norman, I thought the board had suggested you might want to skip this event, given the circumstances." "Just a misunderstanding," Norman replied, his voice too loud, his smile too wide. "That's why I'm here, to clear things up directly. You know how rumors can get distorted." "This isn't the place for that discussion," Alan replied firmly, glancing meaningfully at the others in the group. "We have a meeting scheduled with legal on Monday." "Legal?" Norman's confident facade slipped momentarily. "There's no need for that. A quick conversation now." "Excuse us," Alan interrupted, guiding his wife away. The others in the group followed, leaving Norman and Maggie standing awkwardly alone. Tara's smile was cold. Round 1. For the next 30 minutes, Rick and Tara observed from a distance as the scene repeated with variations. Norman approached different groups, business associates, charity board members, country club friends, each time meeting with polite but firm rejection. Maggie, at his side, grew visibly more uncomfortable with each interaction. "They're completely isolated," Tara observed with satisfaction. "No one wants to risk association with them." "How did you manage that so quickly?" Rick asked, genuinely curious. "I didn't have to do much," Tara admitted. "Once the SEC inquiry became known, once the charity board received anonymous concerns about financial improprieties, once the country club membership was questioned, people distanced themselves naturally. No one wants to be caught in the fallout." "Self-preservation," Rick noted. "The oldest instinct." Tara agreed. "Now watch this." She moved confidently across the room, approaching the event organizer, a tall woman with a tablet who is directing staff. After a brief conversation, Tara returned to Rick's side. "What was that about?" he asked. "Just ensuring Norman doesn't get an opportunity to clear things up from the podium," Tara explained. "The speaking order has been adjusted. His introduction of the main benefactor has been reassigned." "Cutting him out completely," Rick observed. "The final public humiliation," Tara confirmed. Now I think it's time for our paths to cross directly, don't you? Rick nodded, straightening his tie. They moved casually through the crowd, appearing to mingle while actually circling toward where Norman and Maggie now stood awkwardly near the bar. Norman was drinking heavily, his movements becoming less controlled. Maggie kept glancing anxiously toward the exit, clearly wishing to escape. "Remember," Tara murmured as they approached, cold, calm, and utterly in control. They positioned themselves at the bar just a few feet from where Norman was ordering another scotch. Maggie spotted them first, her face draining of color so rapidly that Rick thought she might faint. "Rick!" she gasped, her voice barely audible over the ambient noise of the gala. Norman turned, following her gaze. His expression shifted rapidly from confusion to recognition to fury. "You!" he snarled, taking a step toward Rick. "What the hell are you doing here?" Rick maintained his calm, taking a deliberate sip from his untouched champagne before responding, "Supporting a worthy cause. Isn't that why we're all here?" Norman's face flushed with anger, but before he could respond, Tara stepped forward, her expression a perfect mask of composed civility. "Norman," she greeted him coolly, "I'm surprised you decided to attend, given the board's recommendation." Norman's attention shifted to his wife, his eyes narrowing. "You knew about that?" "The board chairman called me directly," Tara confirmed. "Given my significant donation this year, they wanted to assure me the event would proceed without complications." Norman's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "You've been behind this, haven't you? The accounts, the firm, everything." "Behind what, Norman?" Tara asked, her voice carrying just enough to attract attention from nearby guests. "Your ethical violations at the firm? Your financial mismanagement? Your affair?" She glanced meaningfully at Maggie, who seemed to shrink under her gaze. "You're trying to destroy me," Norman accused, his voice rising. "Both of you, working together." Tara raised a perfectly manicured eyebrow. "I believe you're doing an excellent job of that yourself." Maggie, who had remained frozen in shock, finally found her voice. "Rick," she said, stepping toward him, "please, we need to talk. I've been trying to reach you for days." Rick looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time since discovering her betrayal. The woman he'd married, the woman he'd trusted, now reduced to this desperate, disheveled figure clutching another man's arm. "We have nothing to talk about," Rick said, his voice steady and final. "Please," Maggie pleaded, tears welling in her eyes. "I made a mistake. I can explain everything." "A mistake?" Rick repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Planning for months to leave me after getting your promotion, sleeping with another woman's husband, packing costumes and condoms for your nursing conference. Those aren't mistakes, Maggie. They're choices." Norman, who had been watching this exchange with growing agitation, suddenly grabbed Maggie's arm. "You said he didn't know," he hissed. "You said you were careful." Maggie winced at his grip. "Norman, you're hurting me." "You're hurting each other," Tara observed coldly. "How fitting," Norman rounded on her. "This is your fault, all of it. You couldn't just accept a simple divorce. You had to ruin me." "No, Norman," Tara replied calmly. "Your choices ruined you. I simply ensured there were consequences." A small crowd had gathered around them, drawn by the tension. Norman, noticing the attention, attempted to regain his composure. "This is ridiculous," he declared, straightening his jacket. "I'm a founding partner. I've raised millions for this charity. Everyone here knows me." At that moment, the event organizer approached. "Mr. Fowler," she said with strained politeness, "perhaps it would be best if you stepped outside for a moment." Norman stared at her in disbelief. "You're asking me to leave? Do you know how much money I've raised for this organization?" "Yes, and we're grateful," the woman replied, her voice lowering. "But given the current circumstances and the board's request that you not attend tonight—" "This is insane," Norman snapped, looking around wildly. "Alan, tell her who I am." Alan, watching from a safe distance, merely shook his head slightly and turned away. Norman's face contorted with rage. "Fine," he spat. "Fine. You'll all regret this, every one of you." He turned to Maggie. "Let's go." Maggie didn't move, her eyes still fixed on Rick. "Please," she whispered again. "Rick, I don't have anywhere to go." Rick looked her dead in the eyes and said coldly, "You thought you could do better. How's that working out?" The words hit her like a physical slap. She flinched, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Maggie!" Norman barked from the doorway. "Now!" For a moment she seemed torn, caught between the husband she had betrayed and the lover who was quickly becoming a liability rather than an escape. Then, with a last desperate look at Rick, she followed Norman out of the ballroom. The crowd that had gathered began to disperse, conversations resuming with renewed energy now that fresh gossip had been acquired. Tara took a delicate sip of her martini, her composure perfect.
"That went well," she observed.
Rick nodded, setting down his still full champagne glass. Very well. The final nails in their respective coffins. By morning, Tara said with satisfaction, everyone in Norman's social and professional circles will know exactly what happened here tonight. And Maggie's reputation at the hospital, equally destroyed. I made sure several key staff members were in attendance, Tara confirmed. The story of her being asked to leave a charity gala will spread through the hospital faster than any virus. They stayed another hour, circulating separately through the crowd. Rick noticed how people approached him differently now, some with sympathy, others with barely concealed curiosity. He answered questions vaguely, neither confirming nor denying the specifics of what had occurred. Let them speculate, the truth was irrelevant now. As he prepared to leave, Tara joined him near the exit. One final act remains, she said quietly, the coup de grace. What do you have in mind? Rick asked. Tara's smile was cold and precise. Norman will try to salvage something from this disaster. His reputation may be in tatters, but he still believes his money will protect him. She glanced at her watch. At least for the next 12 hours. And then, Tara explained, the offshore accounts he thought were secret will be emptied. The credit lines he assumed were secure will be severed. The safety net he's relied on will simply vanish, leaving him with nothing. Nothing but the consequences of his actions, Rick concluded. Just like your wife, Tara confirmed. They parted outside the hotel, their alliance having served its purpose. Rick watched as Tara's driver held the door for her, her composure never faltering even as she prepared to deliver the final blow to the man she'd married. I'll be in touch about the final phase, she said before sliding into the back seat. Rick nodded. To consequences. To justice, Tara replied, and then she was gone. The weekend passed in methodical preparation. Rick spent Saturday completing the paperwork for a modest house he'd found in Evanston, just 3 blocks from Norman's parents' home. The realtor had been surprised by his insistence on the location, but the cash offer had overcome any hesitation. Tara kept him updated via their secure burner phones. Norman and Maggie had spent the night arguing in their hotel room, their voices carrying so clearly that the front desk had received multiple complaints. By morning, Norman had discovered his remaining credit cards were declined. His offshore accounts, his final financial reserve, had been emptied. He's in free fall, Tara reported. Called his attorney, who informed him the firm has officially terminated their relationship. Called his broker, who reported that trading irregularities have triggered a freeze on all remaining assets. Rick replied, house closing expedited, keys Monday. Tara's response came quickly, perfect timing. Norman's downfall will be complete by then. Sunday evening brought new developments. Tara's message was concise but spoke volumes. Norman abandoned Maggie at the hotel, told her she was too much trouble. She tried to check into a cheaper motel, but all her cards declined. Currently sleeping in her car, in the hospital parking garage. Rick felt no sympathy, only cold satisfaction. Maggie, who had orchestrated her escape from their boring life with such careful planning, was now homeless, jobless, and abandoned. Every safety net cut, every support system withdrawn, exactly as she deserved. Monday morning, Rick took another personal day from the warehouse. The closing on the Evanston house took less than an hour, the all-cash offer and Rick's perfect credit history streamlining the process. By noon, he had the keys and was arranging for minimal furniture to be delivered. The house itself was unremarkable. A small 2-bedroom with a tidy yard and fresh paint. Its only notable feature was its location, visible from the front porch of Norman's parents' home. A constant, unavoidable reminder of the man who had helped bring their son to ruin. As Rick supervised the furniture delivery, his burner phone buzzed with Tara's update. Norman tried to move into his parents' house this morning. They reluctantly agreed but made clear it's temporary. His father called it a disgrace to the family name when Norman couldn't explain what happened to his money. Rick smiled coldly at the image this conjured. Norman, once so confident in his wealth and status, reduced to sleeping in his childhood bedroom while his father lectured him on responsibility. After the furniture was arranged, just the basics, enough to make the house appear lived in, Rick drove back to Chicago. One final task remained to complete his systematic dismantling of Maggie's life. He located her car easily enough. The red BMW was parked in the far corner of the hospital's staff garage, deliberately positioned away from security cameras. Rick parked nearby and waited. Patience had always been his strength. At 6:15 in the evening, Maggie appeared, walking quickly toward her car, her head down as if avoiding recognition. She looked worse than she had at the gala, her hair pulled back haphazardly, wearing what appeared to be scrubs, probably borrowed from a former colleague. The confident nurse who had packed so carefully for her romantic getaway was gone, replaced by this hunted figure. When Maggie spotted Rick, she froze, her keys clutched tightly in her hand. "Rick," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What are you doing here?" "Finishing things," he replied simply. Maggie glanced around nervously, as if expecting some new humiliation. If you've come to gloat, I don't need to gloat, Rick interrupted calmly. Your situation speaks for itself. Maggie's composure cracked. Is that what you wanted? To see me homeless, jobless, everyone I know avoiding me like I'm contaminated? Her voice rose with each question. Are you happy now? This isn't about happiness, Rick pointed out. It's about consequences. Consequences, Maggie repeated, anger briefly overcoming fear. You destroyed my life, you and that woman, Tora. You worked together to ruin us. No, Rick corrected her, his voice still calm. You destroyed your own life. Norman destroyed his. We just ensured you couldn't escape the results of your choices. It was a mistake, Maggie insisted, tears welling in her eyes. One stupid mistake. Planning for months to leave me after your promotion wasn't a mistake, Rick replied. Sleeping with Norman wasn't a mistake. Packing costumes and condoms for your conference wasn't a mistake. He took a step closer, his voice never rising but carrying absolute finality. Those were choices, Maggie. Deliberate choices. Maggie's shoulders slumped. What do you want from me, Rick? An apology? Fine, I'm sorry. I made terrible choices. Is that what you need to hear? I don't need anything from you, Rick stated simply. Not anymore. Then why are you here? Maggie asked, confusion mixing with desperation, to tell you not to come back to the condo. Not to call my phone, not to contact me through mutual friends. Rick's voice remained steady. You no longer exist in my life. Where am I supposed to go? Maggie demanded, desperation edging into her voice. Norman's abandoned me. The hospital suspended me. My credit cards don't work. My parents won't take my calls. Her voice broke. I have nothing left. That was your choice, Rick reminded her without emotion. You traded loyalty for chaos. Please, Maggie begged, reaching toward him. Just let me get back on my feet. Let me stay in the spare room until I figure things out. I'll sign whatever divorce papers you want. I won't ask for anything. Rick stepped back, avoiding her touch. No, Rick, please, Maggie sobbed, all pretense of dignity gone. I have nowhere to go. Neither did I, Rick pointed out, when my birth parents abandoned me. Neither did I when foster families decided I wasn't worth keeping. Neither did I when you betrayed me with Norman. He looked at her directly, his expression impassive. I survived. You will too. This isn't survival, Maggie argued, gesturing to her car, where a pillow and blanket were visible in the back seat. This is cruelty. No, Rick disagreed. This is justice, the natural outcome of choices you made with full awareness of potential consequences. Maggie stared at him, searching for any sign of the man who had loved her, who had built a life with her. She found none. So that's it? She asked finally. 8 years of marriage, and you just walk away without a backward glance? You walked away first, Rick reminded her. You just expected to do it on your terms, with your new life already arranged while I dealt with the wreckage. Maggie had no answer to that. She stood there, keys clutched in her hand, the full weight of her situation visible in her posture. Goodbye, Maggie, Rick said simply, turning to leave. Wait, she called after him. What about divorce papers? What about the condo, our accounts? Rick paused, looking back. The lawyers will contact you. And Norman? Maggie asked. What did his wife do to him? The same thing I did to you, Rick replied. Stripped away the facades, revealed the truth, applied consequences. You two are perfect for each other, Maggie said bitterly, cold, calculating, heartless. Rick considered this. No, he said finally. We're just two people who understand that betrayal deserves consequences, nothing more. He walked away without looking back, leaving Maggie standing beside her car, the luxury vehicle that was now serving as her temporary home. The symmetry was perfect. The status symbol she had insisted on, now reduced to a shelter of last resort. As he drove away, Rick's burner phone buzzed with a final message from Tara. Norman completely financially ruined. Firm announcing formal investigation. Parents giving him 30 days to sort himself out. Mission accomplished. Rick replied with just 2 words. Thank you. There would be no further contact between them. Their alliance, born of shared betrayal and common purpose, had reached its natural conclusion. 2 strangers who had briefly united to ensure consequences were delivered properly. 3 months later, Rick sat on the porch of his Evanston home, sipping coffee as dawn broke over the quiet neighborhood. The small house had become a sanctuary of sorts. Not flashy, not impressive, but solidly his, paid for in cash, unburdened by memories or expectations. From his position, he could see Norman's parents' house. Norman himself had left weeks ago, reportedly taking a much-reduced position at a small firm in Milwaukee. His reputation in Chicago's financial circles was permanently destroyed, his social standing erased, his wealth gone. A fitting end for a man who had valued status above all else. Maggie had eventually found a job at a small clinic in a neighboring state, according to Dave, who had run into her sister at a grocery store. The nursing board investigation had ended with a warning rather than a license revocation, a mercy Rick hadn't planned on but didn't begrudge. She would rebuild some version of her life eventually, just not the one she'd imagined with Norman, and never again with Rick. The divorce had been finalized last week. Clean, simple, uncontested. Maggie had signed everything without argument, claiming nothing beyond her personal items, which Rick had arranged to have shipped to her new address, the final severance of a connection that had once seemed permanent. From inside the house, Rick's phone rang, the warehouse calling with a question about inventory. He answered efficiently, provided the necessary information, and returned to his coffee. The rhythm of his life had reasserted itself. Work, home, occasional dinners with colleagues, simple, predictable, stable, all the things Maggie had found so boring. In the distance, Norman's father emerged from his house to collect the morning newspaper. He glanced up, noticed Rick sitting on his porch, and quickly looked away. This had become their routine, acknowledgement without engagement. The older man knew exactly why Rick had purchased the house across from theirs. The daily reminder was part of the punishment. Rick finished his coffee as the neighborhood came to life around him. Somewhere, Maggie was waking up in a strange city, building a new life from the ashes of the one she destroyed. Somewhere, Norman was trying to reclaim some fragment of his former status, haunted by what he'd lost. And here sat Rick, in the quiet satisfaction of justice served, not through rage or public confrontation, but through the cold, methodical application of consequences. Some betrayals don't deserve rage, Rick murmured to himself as dawn broke fully over the neighborhood, just the silence of being forgotten. The words settled around him like a verdict, final, absolute, complete.